Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International. 3 teams left remaining in the tournament here. We're about to see those lower finals, and going into it is going to be another rematch here. Abrakeydabra versus Mythic NA. I'm your host, and joining me is Sloot, Nagura, and Sours here. Starting it off on the Motherlode, where Mythic NA, on the last time that we saw them, eked out a pretty quick victory here, Sours.
Yeah, Mythic NA in Motherlode was actually just only a little bit faster than Abrakeydabra was, so they were able to squeeze out the win in Motherlode. But if they get to Game 3 in this series, this is the team that Mythic NA was playing against in Shrine, where they had such a colossal mistake, which cost them the whole game. So it's really like, in theory, this is going to be should be a win for Abrakeydabra, but Mythic NA has what it takes. It's on whichever team can just be composed throughout all 3 of these dungeons, and that's going to be the team that's going to win it all.
Yeah, and the ability for, I believe it was Mythic NA, having that last Shadow Meld skip to be able to go through, proc that final set of reaping, and then run all the way through a huge pack of trash to be able to get to that 3rd boss was absolutely critical to their victory here. But then they also have to take on Temple of Sethralus during another Grievous phase there, so pretty big challenge ahead of them, Sloot, on this one. Now, for Motherlode specifically, we've seen so many teams take 80–90% of their trash in the first wing or 2 here. Are we expecting more of the same there from both teams?
Yeah, I think that's just pretty standard. We see it on live servers. We've seen it here in the tournament so far from all the teams. It's just the easiest. Everybody knows the trash leading up to the 3rd boss, especially the 4th boss too, is so inefficient, such a pain in the butt. Just easy to just get it all out of the way early, play well around the bolstering, and then just skip everything up to that point.
Yep, and Nagura, we've seen a lot of times the Unholy DK has been used in very high trash density dungeons, like Freehold previously. But do we think we're going to see it here, especially with how powerful the double rogue has been for that hard CC they're able to apply, especially to dodge some of those bolstering mobs?
It's very unlikely to bring the Unholy DK because the dungeon is actually bolstering in Motherlode, and we have those really high HP Peacekeepers where you do need a lot of focus damage. Now, Unholy DKs, they have this huge AoE, but I doubt they have the biggest single target focus damage, so they just rather have those rogues.
And again, bringing back the mirror compositions that have defined this Western tournament here. The double Outlaw Rogue with the Windwalker Monk here, and of course, the rest of Druids and Prot Warriors coming into it. So Motherlode is going to be that first game in the series here. Having to deal with the bolstering affix is going to have to slow some of these guys down and make sure they're a lot more methodical on it. For the votes, ABR in Abrakeydabra has a slight advantage here, but this dungeon is going to be a close one.
The Motherlode. The 2 exclamation marks.
Oh yeah, 2 of them, yeah.
Of course, of course. So really the biggest danger, I think I was just talking about it earlier as well, bolstering is the main thing to look out for, especially in such a high trash density dungeon like the Motherlode. Of course, bolstering for those at home means every time a trash mob dies, it will buff the immediate trash around it by 20% of remaining health, and increasing their damage by 20% as well. It does stack, so you definitely want to kind of kill everything at around the same time, or if there's a bigger meteor mob that you want to deal with, just outrange it from everything else that is about to die. Nonetheless, these teams will have to be very coordinated to make sure that they don't honestly produce a boss level mob out of this bolstering.
Yeah, we do see 2 different strats coming in from both of those teams. Abrakeydabra deciding to pull something at the very start. We see the CCs coming in from the Devil Rogues here, to seeing the higher HP mobs, while they kill off those laborers who just have way less HP to not bolster the high HP ones. They do use the blind and the saps in the back and just outrange it.
Abrakeydabra doing well to kind of stomp the first of the packs here. A bit of a more dangerous throw here for Mythic NA on the right, but nonetheless, they do manage to off it completely. Now, there are a few mobs, and we'll see them later, especially the mech jockeys, that are quite dangerous to the immediate melee DPS around them. It's not even just about the tank being in range, but they will just do spot damage with their grease gun on random targets. And as you mentioned earlier, Nagura, definitely these Peacekeepers that we see at the bottom of the screen for Mythic NA, something to really look out for.
Yeah, so essentially almost OGB actually dying here. We were sitting there and they got the quaking on top of it. But of course they are out of combat, so Ladi is able to just rest him back up and they can continue. But this is costing them time. 5 seconds from the death, and of course the rest timer that they need as well. Yeah,
so I believe they Shadow Melded there to get rid of that Peacekeeper. The Shadow Melded just a bit too close together, couldn't move out of it, so they kind of had to clip a little too many quakings for JB's comfort level. Ended up dropping there. Didn't have to use the battle res, as you mentioned, just because, well, well, they didn't even have one available. He was the one who could battle res. Peacekeeper being pulled here along with one of these thugs. These thugs, very tanky mobs, and they do buff themselves with Vaporize. That does an increased amount of damage should they get a successful cast off. But dangerously to the rest of the group, Negro, they do charge far party members.
Yeah, so a random member can get targeted by this charge, which does do a lot of damage. On top of course, if they have the enrage buff on them and it's not being interrupted or dispelled by JB with the Soothe, then the charge is going to do even more damage. And we've seen some big pulls where they pull a couple of thugs together. So if their charges are lined up and they do it at the same time and they actually cast it in the same member, then you can get one shot by that ability.
This is a pretty scary pull here with the triple Peacekeeper as well, thugs, and there's an assassin there too. Definitely want to be interrupting those flechettes from the assassin. You need a hard CC on that too. It's not something you can just kick, so you need a stun, a displace, disorient, whatever it may be. So they do well there to interrupt the flechettes right now. Moving out of that AoE zone, Nerf making sure he doesn't get disoriented. Those are laid down by the Peacekeepers, of course, as they try to scramble and kill these mobs at around the same time, but a lot of damage coming in on Nerf as he desperately tries to leap away, chunking down to 20% constantly and kiting around in circles within this house. Has to be careful not to line of sight JB here.
Yeah, all those mobs, of course, if they bolster, the tank is obviously not able to tank them anymore, just need to start kiting. But I think the bigger problem with bolstering these mobs is not only that they do more damage to the tank because he can kite and just avoid the damage, but they just get more HP and it's just more damage they need to kill them. It's just more inefficiency and just takes more time to do.
Yeah, sometimes pulling less is certainly more efficient in the realm of bolstering. So taking a Method NA quite a bit of time here to grind through the rest of this pack. Abrakeydabra has already gotten up to 28%, dealt with his first round of reaping, just finishing up the rest of it right now. A lot of high HP mobs in the form of those Peacekeepers that spawn in as Lost Souls with 50% of that base HP. Now starting to move through the rest of the trash. And as we mentioned earlier, we're going to see the majority of the trash being cleared before we even get to the second boss.
Yeah, so those Peacekeepers are not always active from the get-go. We see some of them patrolling around and you can pull them just like that. But there's a lot of Peacekeeper who are actually just inactive. And what is going to happen is if you engage with a mech jockey, they're going to try to run to the nearest Peacekeeper and are going to activate the mech activator or something like that, and if it is successful, they will jump into the Peacekeeper, they will activate the Peacekeeper, and then you can damage it and kill it. Now this is what most people do, because if you get the Peacekeeper activated, not only do you get the percentage from killing the Peacekeeper, which is a lot of percentage, but you also get the extra percentage from the mech jockey if you damage the mech jockey somehow before they jump into the Peacekeeper.
Yeah, so definitely a bit of extra bonus there for the players that are taking advantage of that. 42% here for Abrakeydabra as they spawn their second reaping wave, grouping it all together, allowing a bit of breather for both the tank and the healer. Of course, these don't follow bolstering mechanics. They do pull one of the thugs in there just to be able to effectively cleave it down. We do know how frankly inefficient it is to just deal with a reaping wave alone. We don't see that too often this tournament. J dipping quite low here as well. No problem though for Elserat just to heal him back up. Divine Field well topped off at 100%. Method NA now has dealt as well with their first reaping wave, getting the next pull in and getting ready for their 40% round.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra already on their second reaping wave. Now, they will stay in this room or in this area for a long time up until the first boss. So at this point, the only difference we can see between the groups is the trash percentage. Now, it is approximately 10% difference between those two groups. And it is quite big in this dungeon because there's so much trash that you need to kill a lot of trash to actually get the percentage. And it's going to take a long time, especially with bolstering and those high HP Peacekeepers. So Abrakeydabra doing a much better job at handling this trash, especially just dealing with this bolstering and not losing too much time at bolstering those big Peacekeepers.
Yeah, there is a high amount of trash density in this dungeon. It almost feels like the dungeon naturally has teaming in it just by the sheer amount of mobs that you do need to kill. So you can imagine on teaming weeks just how much you actually need to kill. Fortunately, we don't have teaming here in this dungeon for them right now. Abrakeydabra is still struggling to kill and everything equally here on the side. Both teams at about 10% in their respective packs right now. Triple Peacekeeper up on the side of Method NA again as Nerf leaps away, making sure he gets out of there before he gets smacked in the face by the low thugs and Triple Peacekeeper hits.
Now I wonder one thing, if because the last time we saw these two teams play against each other in Method Method NA and Abrakeydabra were really close to one another, but they actually have this one extra reaping skip at the very end, Method NA, that just saved them so much time compared to Abrakeydabra strat. Now I wonder if Abrakeydabra actually saw Method strat and actually adapts to it, because it's very easy to adapt and it just saves them so much time.
The vendor and the jockey getting sapped, double sapped rather, here for Abrakeydabra, making sure that they don't summon the mech just yet until they kill the other mobs. Don't want to bolster that. And frankly, the vendors are just a pain in the butt to deal with. They do a lot of casts that need to be interrupted, including a Cola Refreshment cast that will heal non-dispellable, might I add. Not that any teams have dispel in the first place right now, but non-dispellable heal on one of the enemies, making it much more difficult to deal with, especially in this bolstering sense. Elserat getting down to 2% HP there, manages to barely hang on as he heals himself up. They'll need to be quickly spread out for this Quake Pulse. A bit unstable here for Abrakeydabra, so hopefully they can hold that together as Method NA rifled through 51% of the trash, getting ready to spawn their reaping, but Shakib takes a huge hit, probably one of the grease guns in there from the jockeys.
Yeah, this is a very dangerous pull from Abrakeydabra here. Not only do they pull the reaping, but they also pull a lot of trash on top of this reaping. Now, the one thing that almost made Elserat die was one of the assassins actually getting his deadly poison off. It's a cast that is interruptible and that you have to interrupt, because if it goes off, then all the abilities and all the melee attacks are actually going to apply a stacking poison debuff. And we see Elserat actually going down here without a Battle Rush being available, of course.
Yeah, but fortunately, it's just with 2 mobs left that have barely any HP. Now, it is a deceiving amount of HP because of the bolstering stacks that those 2 mobs have, but fortunately, they are able to kill them off. Dr. J did get his cheat death consumed on that previous danger that they just had. Elserat now being off-resed by Swagfist, the Windwalker Monk, on Abrakeydabra. The third Reaping Wave has now procced for Method NA, which is facing the room of the first boss, but I'm not sure if they're going to do a bit more percent before getting to him.
Most definitely. There's one more thing to note, that Abrakeydabra is just very lucky right now, because Swagfist was casting the Resurrect on Elserat, and they did get the Quaking on the very last second, just barely not interrupting his rest. So lucky by Team Abrakeydabra here, not losing too much time from this healer dying. But I do believe, as you said, they will just do a little bit more trash and probably wait for the Bloodlust to be ready and then engage the boss fight with the Bloodlust.
JB doing well there to typhoon the 2 Gravebolt casters from the Reaping Wave back into the pile of mobs, which are just sitting innocently nuking random members of the raid by themselves. So I want to get everything in there and cleave it down together. Finally, the 3rd Reaping Wave does go down for Method NA as they rear and U-turn back into the kind of pile of trash, getting ready to do some more percent. Abrakeydabra now on 67%, so the field's kind of been evened out a bit. The trash percentage isn't that high in favor of Abrakeydabra anymore, and they have a death on the board. But if I'm not mistaken, we just had another death from Lighty as I was speaking. 2nd death there for Method NA right now.
Yeah, so 2 versus 1 death. We see Abrakeydabra actually engaging the boss without their Bloodlust being ready. So they either just pop it later into the fight, or they pop it for the trash later on. Now, this boss here does still have some abilities that you need to watch out for. We just saw this pulse that knocks everyone back and leaves a debuff behind everyone that does ticking damage. And of course, we saw the frontal here as well.
So the key here is that the boss will launch 3-foot bombs, essentially, that randomly around the room. The players will need to redirect them before they explode back into the boss. Every one that hits the boss will make him take 50% increased damage for, I believe, a 20-second debuff, and it does stack to 3. So the trick here is to get the first 2 in right away, and then get the 3rd one in just as the debuff's out to wear off, so that you extend the debuff to its maximum allowed time, and then refresh it for that extra damage intake as well. Spreading out here for the Quaking, and you can see that they're kiting the boss away from these coin gold piles, as the boss will try to grab the coins and increase his damage done permanently for the rest of the encounter by 10%.
Yes, of course, he's dragging the boss around now. One thing they can also do with the boss is, because you probably have the healer move to the bombs and put them into the boss to get this damage increase, because you don't want the melees to walk away from the boss and lose damage. Now, one thing you can do is actually move the boss into the bombs instead of having someone throw them in, which means you lose even less damage, because even the healer can DPS. But we see Elserat just walking around, throwing in those bombs, losing a little bit of damage, but he can handle it.
He actually just barely missed that third bomb for a second. It landed right beside the tank. So unfortunately for them, kind of showing their lack of soccer skills in the EU prowess. You'd expect an EU team to do better than that, but nonetheless, they do manage to get the third one in. Another death from Lighty coming up, 74% on the board. We'll have to see how this NA team fares in the soccer ball kicking here for the boss, but 3 deaths on the board now for them. That's going to start costing them in the long run, especially against a team that's looking quite well polished right now in Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra are doing so well. They almost downed the boss here at 77% trash. That means they're actually, not only are they ahead almost a whole boss fight, but they're also a 3% ahead in trash. So Abrakeydabra are doing so much better than Mythic NA now. With, you know, Mythic NA is having some of those problems with a death here and there, just costing them time, right?
And costing them time, and you know, we keep visiting the same fact. It's not just the 5 seconds that goes on the board, it's the amount of time spent rezzing the player, it's the amount of damage lost as whatever they die to is still being cleaned up by the remaining 4 members of the team. Abrakeydabra has downed the first boss, moving on towards the second boss here. A lot of trash once again remaining between here and the next boss, but I assume they're going to be picking up most of, minus the 100% trash mark, of course, before engaging the second boss.
Now this trash here is very dangerous, and we've seen some other teams go ahead and let the rogues see the Earth Scrapers and only pull the Mine Rest because they do have less HP, and it is dangerous to bolster the Earth Scrapers because they just do so much damage to the group and to the tank. But we see Abrakeydabra just pulling down on top of the Mine Rest, just making sure they have this focus damage on the Earth Scrapers to make sure they're not getting bolstered and just handling it very well.
Earth Shaper is very, very scary mob here for the tanks. They do use their Bloodlust on this really large pull here. Now the Earth Shapers, they do have that Earth Shield that they can cast on some of the other enemies. Usually not too much of concern in terms of offensive dispels, but they don't have that luxury here. But you have to save some interrupts for their Rock Lance that you can see casting right there. They interrupted last second. Extremely dangerous for the tank if you hit them. Now you can reflect one, it is a magic cast, but several hitting you at the same time can honestly just topple a tank immediately. 10% left for coin-operated Crowd Pummeler for Mythic NA there on the side, after which I would expect them as well to start working their way up towards the second boss.
Yeah, you see Abrakeydabra doing a double pull again here with Earth Shapers and those Sappers, which explode on low HP, which is actually not very good if you have bolstering, right? Because the Sappers just cast the explosion and just pretty much kill themselves, meaning that they will put a bolstering stack on all the other mobs. So you need to try to focus the Sappers a little bit less compared to the Earth Shapers, of course, because they just don't kill themselves compared to the other mobs.
Ursula going off here again. We get that Typhoon with Vortex combo out of Elsarat there, kind of mocking an AoE grip of a DK just to make sure he gets the interrupts. Final blast going off from the Sappers. Well done by them to make sure those are the last remaining mobs, so that once they kill themselves, there is nothing else that they're going to bolster, making their lives more difficult. 94% on the board for Abrakeydabra. Probably moving up to the second boss very shortly here as they skip most of this trash with the double Rogue Shroud as needed. And Mythic NA only now starting to work on the trash that Abrakeydabra is pretty much just finished.
Yeah, so the last time these guys played against each other, it was so much closer. I think this is the showcase of bolstering, right? We saw Mythic NA not really having any big wipes or any problems with the trash. I think the biggest problem they just had was losing so much time on bolstering, just having a couple of bolster stacks on the Peacekeepers, just giving them so much more HP, needing more time to kill them, having one death here, one death there, just everything accumulated just makes them be so much more behind compared to Abrakeydabra that they're already in the third boss here.
Azarok here has been pulled.
Second, sorry.
Ah, well, who's counting anyway? Abrakeydabra has been pulled here. Abrakeydabra has pulled Azarok here, the second boss of the dungeon. Now, he does start with 4 of these Earth Ragers around him, which will fixate players, and should they melee them, do an increasing bleed stack on them. So you're seeing the players kind of kite in a circle around the boss here to maximize cleave efficiency on top of Azarok. He does do a Tectonic Smash, frontal cone that will stun you and do a fair bit of damage should it hit you. Once you kill the initial 4 mobs, you will spawn 1 mob periodically, 1 more Rock Elemental, Stone Elemental, the Earth Gazer, and periodically empower them as well, meaning they can no longer be CC'd, but they do increase damage, but also take a ton of increased damage, so you want to focus those down quickly, Nagura.
Yeah, so of course you want to kill them fast, or you kite them as we see them doing here, because of course they're 3 melee players, and Elserad kind of being a melee DPS too if he wants to do damage in cat form. So they can't really focus them because one of them is actually fixated and can't go close. If they hit you, you do get a bleed DUF that does stack and does do a lot of damage, especially in a tyrannical setting. So what they want to do is just kite the boss in a circle while being out of range of the melee is hitting you, of the melee that's hitting you, but them still be able to AoE them with their AoE abilities.
Azerok now having some trash combined with it for Abrakeydabra, some of the trash that they prior pulled on top. Now, bosses can bolster, let's keep that in mind, so they have to be careful not to kill that trash before Azerok dies. I'm sure they've practiced this a million times, so they know exactly the percentage that they usually pull at as to not kind of run that risk, but they'll pay close attention to it, making sure that is not the case, and Azerok is falling quite fast at 13%. Method and A not far behind. They are starting to kind of climb up the hill to Azerok, but right now they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. So we see Abrakeydabra actually adapting their strategy to Method and A strat. So this is actually interesting to see because Abrakeydabra was not doing this the last time around, but it was Method and A that beat Abrakeydabra exactly in this dungeon, and Method and A playing this exact strat. Now we see Swagfist is dying, but the boss is dead as well. They do have a battle res available to them, which they can use, but it's only one mob left that they have to finish off, so maybe they just choose not to. But yeah, Abrakeydabra beating Method and A with their own strategy here.
Yeah, I mean, interesting to see. Elserad goes down as well, and Swagfist got rocked in the face earlier. They will not use the battle res right now because there's just a couple of mobs left.
He actually respawned here too. So.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why he's not releasing. That is a good point. The checkpoint is now here since they've downed Azerok. Perhaps some internet issues on the side of Swagfist. We'll have to kind of wait and see what happens there. We did just see another death go down on Method and A. Battle res was used immediately, so they'll have one less battle res until about 3 more minutes. They'll have their second charge come up. 4:30 left on their Bloodlust as well, but they have a lot to chew through right now in the form of Azerok.
Yeah, this boss at Tyrannical just takes so much time, so it will take them a while to catch up to Abrakeydabra, but their Windwalker just not being there, having probably disconnect issues, is obviously going to cost them a lot because with only 2 DPS, everything else is going to take you a lot longer, specifically because there's only the bosses left, right? Abrakeydabra actually only didn't proc the Reaping, which we saw Method and A doing last time around. So Method and A did proc the Reaping, skipped all the way to the next boss and Shadow Melted there, but we see Abrakeydabra actually needing a little bit of percentage to proc that last Reaping here.
Yeah, they do have that CC blinded mob there, the Earth Shaper, that they're just kind of dancing around looking at. They're probably trying to figure out exactly what they want to do with their kind of unlucky, unfortunate situation with Swagfist not being able to res yet, just for whatever reason that may be. So they're probably considering whether or not we take on this final Reaping pack as a 4 group or we just go ahead. Method and A, though, starting to catch up and close some ground here. Azerok reaching 35% for them in just a moment, doing well to dodge that tectonic smash. And at this point, it's just, you know, once you deal with the initial part of this boss, the rest of it is really quite simple once all the ads are done. It's really just kill the boss, Forehead.
Definitely. Now we see Method and A also be at 94%, which was the exact percentage Abrakeydabra has been at. So now we see as well them, of course, doing their own strategy, engaging with this pack with the mini boss, which actually is a very annoying pack to deal with. Usually, it does make sense for them to pull it here to proc this Reaping, but normally when you play this dungeon in live service, you don't really want to engage this pack because of this mini boss just casting the ability Cover, which pretty much makes all the mobs around him redirect the damage to him, and him taking, I believe it's 70% less damage taken, so it's very inefficient to pull this pack unless you have really good control and drag the mobs around the mini boss or away from the mini boss when he casts Cover.
Round and round they go. Fortunately, Swagfist has indeed reconnected. There was a bit of a DC issue for them, but they have reconnected and are now full strength. 100% is on the board as they've proc the Reaping and have run immediately down the hill, getting ready to get in the 3rd boss's room and using that Shadow Meld immediately to just kind of drop aggro on all the trash that they ran by, including the Reaping wave that they just spawned as well. So they get right into the thick of things here with Rick's Flux Flame, a particularly dangerous boss for tanks, as all of her damage is fire-based. A lot of physical that you can't mitigate. Now, there are some advantages to the Prot Warrior here. For every 2 chemicals that she throws out is always on the closest 2 proximity targets, so you can bait who they go on, and the Prot Warrior can spell reflect one of those every other wave.
Yeah, and then of course, since there's two debuffs, two magic debuffs, only one of them can be dispelled by the healer because of course every successful dispel triggers a cooldown on the healer. So you want to make sure it either gets spell reflect, so the healer can dispel the other one, or it gets cloaked, or a big defensive cooldown is being used. So whoever you want the debuff to be on needs to be the closest target to the boss to get this debuff on them.
So the general mechanic of the fight outside of those abilities, of course, Flux Flame will cast that kind of Azerite pool on the ground, targeted near players' locations. 2 rounds of that for every 1 round of Propellant Blast. The Propellant Blast will push the pools off of the edges of the platform, so you want to bait them in proper areas, and the Propellant Blast will also target a player. So you can definitely target those in the direction of the pools you just threw down so that you don't run out of space on the platform. You can see them doing well there to remove 1 half of it and likely will bait the other half. Per one of these cycles, Propellant Blast, you will have a couple rounds, of course, of the debuffs that we talked about. Outside of that is just heavy tank damage, so you'll see a lot of Ignore Pain spam from the Warrior. Nothing they can really mitigate with block too much, and they'll just be kiting in and out of those pools. That's why they're so localized to one area of the platform.
Yeah, and we can see Elsarat not doing that much damage on this boss because he needs to heal this tank constantly, and that's one indicator of seeing how badly a healer needs to heal, because of course if there's nothing to heal, a healer wants to min-max as much damage as possible, and by Elsarat just doing 3k DPS, that means the tank definitely needs a lot of healing here.
So down to 14% now. Mythic Dungeon has also pulled the boss not too long ago, already down to 50%. So a lot of damage coming out of them over there on the smaller screen. Bloodlust is now coming up for Mythic Dungeon in 3 seconds. Doubt they will use it on this boss at this point, of course. Abrakeydabra still has 25 seconds to go on their Bloodlust, and Rixa's about to fall here in just a moment. We'll see a quite predictable skip of all of the trash leading up to the final boss's room. They're just going to run past everything, just kind of mass meld as much as they can. A rogue cloak through everything as much as they can, and then use their shadow meld at the end when they are ready to drop aggro quite far into the boss's room. They certainly don't want to proxy aggro any of the bombs along the outside. Method now at 20% on Rixa.
Yeah, so this is actually pretty close now with the unfortunate events for Abrakeydabra. I just want to shout out that they did a really good job dealing with the situation, because as we talked about earlier, they were only a 99% trash, and they were in the space of mind to see this Earthshaper to not proc the Reaping and waiting for their Windwalker to be back. If they would have triggered the Reaping, then they couldn't have done the skip without their Monk, of course, because then he couldn't have been rested. He was not able to come back with all the Reaping to the skip. So them seeing the Earthshaper waiting for the Monk to come back and then killing the Earthshaper was a very good idea and very good choice by Abrakeydabra here.
Definitely a very nice patient play from them. Mogul Razdunk, the final boss of the dungeon here, is a 2-phase fight. So you'll have phase 1 at from 100 to 50 as well. A bit of trouble here. I'm just going to interrupt that for a moment as NA finally gets through, but Lighty getting quite low as well. And there's a Quaking about to go off, so it does finish him off. As we do know that Quaking hits for 20% of your max HP. He was down to 15% there, so the death was almost inevitable. Shakib did proc his cheat death as well, so a bit sloppy there from Method NA, but they are getting the res up and getting ready to pull the boss. But back to the main boss, the last boss fight here that we see from Abrakeydabra. At 50%, we will trigger the kind of phase 2 or transition phase where the boss will rise up in the air, getting immune to all damage, and 2 mobs will spawn Nagur on the sides of the platform.
Yeah, so on this main phase, as we can see here, there's 3 very dangerous abilities to look out for. It's this Gatling gun that does get casted on the tank's position, and then will either go clockwise or counterclockwise, which you have to be very careful about. Of course, you don't want to get hit by this since it does do a lot of damage on Tyrannical. And then we have the missile, which will target or prefer range players. So Elsarat will pretty much get targeted by every single missile. He needs to make sure he goes away from the boss, making sure that it hits him away, so the melees don't have to walk away from the boss and can continue to do damage.
So here we see, just as mentioned, the 2 Sky Scorchers spawn. They are brought it together immediately, and they just want to cleave them down as quickly as they can. These Azerite Heartseekers can actually be intercepted by other players, but will leave a 35% healing debuff on you. So the tank taking both of them, not always the best idea, but somebody will need to kind of help distribute some of the damage as they make sure to bait the bosses crash down on top of these pillars right now with the drill smash. They have to get through 3 of them in order for that shield to shatter.
Yeah, once the shield shatters, the boss will go back into his normal phase. As we can see here, the shield getting removed. Now, one more thing to watch out here in this normal phase is those moonbots on the side. They will change direction, as we can see them flying around on the side of the room right here. Once they got their final position, they will do a frontal cast of missiles pretty much that you need to dodge. And as we can see here, the group is in a safe position. Now you need to make sure to drag the boss into a safe area of those missiles, because if you drag him too late and he casts a Gatling gun, then of course the boss does not move.
Yeah, so tanks definitely need to pre-move. You can certainly imagine the platform as a 3x3 grid, and there's always going to be one row and one column filled by the fire of those robots that go over to the side more or less. So you want to find yourself in the safe spaces of that area. But it looks like Abrakeydabra is ready to finish off the boss here. They've already completed their last wave of reaping, and they're going to dominantly take this first game over Mythic NA. But certainly Mythic NA is not done just yet.
There it is, taking down the last boss here, Abrakeydabra. Even with the small DC issue that they had to overcome, they take a very convincing victory on the Motherlode here. And Sours, while there wasn't so huge and flashy of pulls where you had all kinds of massive mobs coming in, the execution cannot be understated. The fact that they did not create such large mobs out of bolstering and did such an excellent job with their interrupts.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra did a really good job with all of their crowd control in the beginning of the dungeon. So of course there's been a change fairly recently where crowd control no longer allows mobs to get bolstered, so they went through the dungeon much more efficiently than Mythic NA. And as they were going through the dungeon efficiently, Mythic NA was having hiccups here and there, random deaths happening to their members. They were just falling further and further behind with each pull. And then by the time that Abrakeydabra actually killed the second boss, even though they had a issue with one of their members, they still killed it before Mythic NA had even engaged the boss. And then they maintained their lead that entire time, and then even skipping to the last boss, they did it more cleanly than Mythic NA did, and they had a very convincing victory as a result of all that.
And very convincing, like you mentioned, and it really seemed like they cleaned up a lot of their act as well. As we had previously seen, Mythic NA play very strongly at the first time that they went on to this matchup in the Motherlode. Now here, Abrakeydabra taking that early lane. Now we will be back after this short break with Temple of Sethrulus. Abrakeydabra up 1-0. Mythic Dungeon International here. Mythic NA on the back foot, losing that Motherlode to Abrakeydabra here. I'm Jack. Joining me is Sloot, Nagura, and Sours here. Now, last time that we saw both of these teams face off in the Motherlode, it was Mythic NA who seized the day on this one. Round 2 is going to be on Temple of Sethrulus. Both teams have had incredibly strong runs throughout this so far here, Sours.
Yeah, Mythic NA had a really good time when they did this dungeon. However, they were against 40K, which had an even better time, so they ended up losing when they did it. But they were going quite fast, but 40K had much bigger pools, and so that's why they went faster. But when Abrakeydabra did this dungeon earlier, they actually ended up winning it, but they won it with a slower time than 40K did. So whether or not either of these teams have adjusted their routes in here, now that they've seen some of the faster routes in Temple of Sethrulus, we'll have to see. Abrakeydabra has adjusted their route in the Motherlode since the last time they ran it, so we'll see if they've made any changes to how they approach the dungeon right now.
And one thing you mentioned, Sours, as well, and I remember commenting on it when Mythic NA did their Temple of Sethrulus, was that we're so shocked to see them kind of be reserved with their pulls and not doing those big pulls. So now that they're more in their comfort zone, I wouldn't be shocked to see those huge second and third boss room pools coming out of Mythic NA.
That adjustment's going to be crucial. We even were talking previously about JB mentioning how strong 40K's strategy was when they lost that run here, and having those adjustments even on limited practice when you're going from one day to the next to having these longer days, especially for Mythic NA, which has had to fight its way out of that lower bracket, will be absolutely crucial for them to take this next game and stay alive here in the series. Temple of Sethrulus has been a very common dungeon for teams to be able to run through here, and we're going back to that same old, that dedicated composition that we all have been seeing so far here. Round 2 of Mythic NA versus Abrakeydabra here on the Temple of Sethrulus.
So,
Well, I'm actually quite curious to see just, there's only so, we've talked about this dungeon so many times throughout this tournament, and it is quite linear. The double rogue does provide advantage in giving you the minimal amount of options, at least in what terms of trash you skip, but there's really not that much you can skip in this dungeon. So the kind of time you can start to make up is really having more aggressive offensive pulls, something that Method NA certainly had space for last time. We know they 2-pulled the second boss room and 2-pulled the dervishes, of course, in the, the third boss room. So we'll see if they adjust that to a 1-pull here.
Yes, we see Method NA doing a pretty huge pull here, and we see one thing to note, JB is actually running Tree of Life. Now we saw Sours mention that JB is actually a very big fan of cultivation and doesn't like Tree of Life very much, but we've seen all the other Residents pretty much exclusively running that talent in this dungeon, specifically because of those big pulls coming in and just this fortified trash being so dangerous. And now we see JB running that Tree of Life too.
Yeah, so I mean, that is quite indicative that they will be looking to do some really large pulls here. Tree of Life has already come out of JB, just faded off him as he goes back into kitty form and helps to cleave down the rest of the trash prior to pulling Adaris and Aspix right here. Now, we are back in a volcanic setting along with Grievous here, so once Grievous gets going below 90% on one of the party members, it will start to take more and more not frequently, but it will start to take harder up to a maximum of 4 stacks. Volcanic Nagura, of course, not really too much of a concern for them, but the more mobs you pull, the more plumes you will have to dodge depending on your proximity to the mobs.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra, a pretty big significant pull that they used Bloodlust on. Now, on the side of Method NA, they actually saved their Bloodlust. Now, we've seen some teams before save their Bloodlust, not used it at all in this first boss room, and just used it in a second boss room to do a very large pull, which we might see coming out of Method NA after this first boss fight here.
Yeah, a bit scary because that also locks you into not having Bloodlust available for the third boss's room, and those dervishes can really pack a punch when you pull all 6 of them, so we'll see if they can handle that. JB certainly no stranger to this dungeon. If I'm not mistaken, got a couple of the high key world first, pushing through Tempros Thralis, so he's definitely quite comfortable healing Galvast on the third boss encounter in this dungeon and those dervishes that come with him prior to the boss spawning. Now, about this fight though, Adaris and Aspix, one of the bosses, always starting with Aspix, will have Lightning Shield present on them, so if anybody does any direct damage to them during this phase, they will have quite a bit of damage reflected back onto them.
Definitely. So you want to make sure, of course, that you're not accidentally hitting the lightning shield. You do have a timer to see when the lightning shield switches. So just to be sure, a couple of seconds before the lightning shield switches, you want to make sure to stop damaging that boss, because on top of all the other abilities from this boss fight, it might be very deadly. As we see the lightning shield switching here, Adaris being active again. Now, Adaris does have some very deadly mechanics that you do have to watch out for, which just like the Cyclone Strike, as we've just seen, which will target one random member and cast a cone of cyclones towards him, so they need to make sure to dodge out of their way. And then there's one more ability from Aspix once he has the lightning shield, actually, that we saw on Elstrad, which is this big circle that after a while does a lot of damage to him, and we of course saw the static shock with a huge AoE.
So no shock here that Abrakeydabra is behind on killing the boss, as they did opt to do a larger amount of trash, including that first reaping wave prior to Aspix, killing Aspix and Adarix, the first pair of snake bosses here. Method NA stealthing right through and grabbing that first Crawlus Rider. Now the room we see behind them, of course, is the second boss room, so really curious to see here whether they're going to pull the whole room, pop Tree of Life, and pop everything to stay alive. A couple of leftover smaller pull mobs right before they likely get to the big action in the room. Abrakeydabra has killed the first boss and is moving through this arrow gauntlet bridge.
Yeah, so Method NA just did a shroud skip here, and it reminded me of BlizzCon actually, because Method NA was playing against previous Method PogChamp, where Elsrite and Jay were in this team. They were playing against each other in exactly this dungeon, and they didn't manage one of those skips, Method NA, and losing so much time, but they ended up winning anyway, because the former Method PogChamp actually had a full team wipe on the last boss. So let's hope both of these teams play a little bit cleaner this time around and don't have those huge mistakes and those huge wipes coming in.
I'm sure those are horribly suppressed and bottled memories that they have and will in no way come out later in the future. Method NA now at 26%. Trash has as well has dealt with their first reaping wave. Pretty large pull coming up here from Abrakeydabra. Doesn't look like they're committing to the full room pull, however. A lot of frontals in the form of Noxious Breath coming from those Crawlisk Riders. There's 2 of them. Quite dangerous mobs, deal a lot of damage, will dismount around 50%, and then start casting lightning shields along with cleaves. Looking like we're getting the whole room pull coming out of Mythic Dungeon here. Something we did not see from them earlier in the tournament, but they've committed this time.
Yeah, so they have used their Bloodlust here. As we said, they saved their Bloodlust for exactly this pull, the Tree of Life coming out of JB here. They pulled the whole boss room together. Now, this is very scary because we've seen teams before doing this, like the Team Palooka, but they did have the Mooncoin for the trees coming out and tanking them, which they don't, of course, have available to them here in Mythic Dungeon. So they have to, the tank just keeps kiting as you see him dropping so low from having all those mobs hit him. The Ring of Peace coming out to make sure Nerf is safe, and of course all those just poison debuffs from the mobs applying on like the whole group.
Yeah, that's actually part of the major danger here. It's not even the tank damage, it's a lot of the venomous spit that goes out on random members. We have Electrified Scales getting well interrupted there on the side for Mythic Dungeon. Don't want any reflective damage because as soon as these players start to dip too low, then Grievous is just going to take over and it's going to make JB's life a living nightmare. It's already hard for him to expend the global cooldown just to even dispel some of the poisons off the players. So there's just a lot of damage going through. Nonetheless, they do hold on, manage to pull the full room pull off, trying to get Lighty desperately out of that max 4-stack Grievous above 90% HP, and they cleave the 40% down, the Reaping Wave for 40% down. Looks like they're not going to pull it with the boss. I think they need to, okay, JK. They do pull the boss as well. No breather for JB needed, and they're just going to go right into it.
Yeah, this was a very crucial moment for Mythic Dungeon because this pull, the Reaping spawns in the middle of this pull. As you can see, they have 50% trash. So after 40%, they got the Reaping Wave, and they still have to kill off 10% of the trash. But the boss does not spawn until all the mobs are dead. But you also have all these Reaping mobs on top of the normal mobs, right? So Mythic Dungeon needs to make sure that they're actually focusing the actual mobs and not the Reaping ones, because they want the boss to spawn and they want to engage him while having the Reaping still up.
So we just have Myrektha spawn now, the second boss for Abrakeydabra. So certainly, once again, I mean, we've seen it a few times before. They did a 2 pull for the room. It cost them a lot of time. It was safer. They didn't have Bloodlust available, but now they're behind. Myrektha has gone downstairs. Apparently there's stairs in this room, by the way. Has gone underground, and JB does run over, jumps on top of the egg, and is getting ready to pull one of those agitated Nimbus over.
Yeah, so the Nimbus is pretty scary to pull on top, especially in a fortified setting, but as long as you interrupt them up and you make sure that you heal away the AoE, you're going to be fine. We're probably going to see Elstrat do the same thing if he hasn't already pulled it, and we see the percentage now for Abrakeydabra, they're actually on 55%, while Mythic Dungeon is on 50%. Now, they are a little bit behind on the boss HP, of course, but this extra charge percentage that they have means they're actually kind of even at this point.
Yeah, and it is a bit more flexible on where they want to proc the Reaping now. I assume we'll still see the 60% Reaping for both teams in Galvast room, the third boss room, but they'll likely have to pull 1 or 2 less mobs, making it a bit less dangerous. So maybe they too will be able to commit to a full 6 Dervish pull without having to add an extra either Nimbus or Caster later on. 53% on the board for Mythic Dungeon as they start the final phase of Myrektha, the second boss in here. The boss has now combined both Poison and Blinding Sand abilities, wanting to make sure you move out of that Noxious Breath and then keep moving so that that pulse that goes on right there doesn't get you trapped with the Knot of Snakes and make you take for a lot of damage. Blinding Sand, easy, of course. You just want to turn around for the boss before the cast finishes so you don't get disoriented.
Yeah, so this last phase is actually the most dangerous fight of this boss combat, and it's also very important to note that on a tyrannical setting and high keys in general, you need to make sure that you kill this last phase very fast. Now we see Swagfist dying Abrakeedabra's side, just as I mentioned how difficult this boss fight is, but I do believe it was because of the Nimbus being up on top of everything else.
Ashine getting quite low as well, really having a lot of trouble getting out of these 4 stacks. Elstrat, a couple of people were still taking down their Divine Field, still hovering around 50% HP, down to 24 now. A lot of damage coming in from Elstrat is really struggling to get over that 90% threshold to get out of that Grievous, especially with all of the snake poison damage coming in on top of the boss himself. Jay has now dipped down into the 4 stack as well. So Elstrat certainly has his work cut out for him. They are in the final phase, but 30% is still quite a bit, even in this kind of fortified setting here. Mythic Dungeon has scooched on ahead and has done the full 6 Dervish pull as well, with Tree of Life coming out from JB.
So we actually saw both Ashine and Dr. Dr. J getting hit by the Blinding Sands, so they did not turn around, actually got disoriented, but since they're rogues, they actually managed to survive. But we see both Swagfist and Divine Shield drop so low, and the boss is in 7% HP, while they have all these adds up what they have to deal with, just spawning those sands, and Dr. J going down. They do not have a battle rest ready. Now they just have to try to finish off the boss so they can get Dr. J back up, and they have to kite the boss around, and there we go. So they did manage to kill the boss, but it was a struggle.
I hope somebody can write the good doctor prescription for that death. He should be able to release here as the tech point has been reached with Merektha's death. Everybody finally healthy and above 90% threshold. All eyes now on Method NA on the right side as they still struggle to finish off the rest of this Dervish pull. A bit of sloppiness with the kiting, unfortunately, from Nerf, but it is quite difficult. You want to make sure you keep those Dervishes as close together as possible, and the only way they move, based on this team comp, is blinking to their current active target. Lighty does go down here, so death just at the very end. We still have a Nimbus present in there, and we've also procced the 60% Reaping Wave, so it is absolutely crucial that they don't have any more deaths right now.
It was very important that they did have this battle rest ready for Lighty here, because of course the Reaping Wave coming in on top of all this, the Dervishes that they did kill by now. I'm actually wondering if they want to pull some of those Reaping mobs on the boss. Oh, they're Shadow Melted, of course, they're Nano. So they got rid of the Reaping Wave. They are pulling Galvas now. Now Galvas is one of the most difficult bosses, if not overall, in all the dungeons, because it's just so much AoE damage on the group. Now, it is a 45 setting, but even there, it is very difficult to deal with because of that Grievous.
A lot of damage coming here for Abrakeydabra. They opted to use their second Bloodlust here for the same 6 pull for the Dervishes that Method NA did without the Bloodlust. So much damage going off as the Nimbus gets that AoE pulse. Swagfist goes down. They have their battle res available right now, but Elslad is just struggling to keep everybody alive. Dr. J, 4 stacks ticking down violently. Divine Field barely ignore painting as much as he can to try and stay alive.
God.
Finally manages to heal everybody up as they stabilize with the remainder of the 60% Reaping Wave here. Swagfist has been res, but Ashine goes down, immediately releases in the second boss room, and is starting to run back to help them out.
You can see just how dangerous this pull is. All those Dervishes doing so much AoE damage on the whole group, just jumping around, doing so much tank damage on top of that too, while this Nimbus is doing this AoE ability as well, just dropping everyone so low. And then you have the Grievous, of course, which means if you don't heal the people up immediately, they will get up to 5 stacks of this Grievous, just constant ticking damage on everybody. Now we see Elslad being so low on mana, and they're still not out of combat. They have to reset this boss. Elslad has no way of healing this boss side with this little amount of mana.
Yeah, and I mean, there's just 4 stacks all over the place for Grievous right now. Elstrad has dug himself quite a nasty hole here. Method NA, 10% left on Galvaz, has executed this boss quite perfectly so far, making sure that they soak up those electric beams from the spires on the side. Don't want to let the boss soak those. If he reaches 100 energy, which he can very quickly by soaking one of the beams, will explode and one-shot the entire group. So no problem for them. I would say probably the hardest cusp and difficulty of this dungeon is now done for them with the 2 mass room pulls and Galvaz. Now, of course, the probably hardest part of the dungeon here is this lightning bridge, Nagura.
Most definitely, but I've never gotten hit by any of those lightning bolts.
Oh no!
No, Nerf!
Oh no!
Oh, no.
I spoke too soon.
Clip face.
Unfortunately, Nerf has been, well, smacked in the face by some lightning orbs. Lighty, of course, Monkey See, Monkey Do, decides to take one to the face as well, just to see what it feels like, but does come back in right away. Actually, was that Yoda or Lighty on the side there? Either way, one of them did get clipped at the very end, and they move forward now to get towards the channel and stop this wave of lightning coming in.
Now, this is actually very annoying for them because they had to commit a battle rest for Nerf here. Now, this can matter at the very end because now they're out of battle rests. This means if on the last boss fight, anyone dies, they do not have a rest to get them back up, and the last boss fight is a very long fight. So this could actually become a problem just by Nerf getting hit by one of those lightnings. Now we see them actually pulling this channeler here, which we've seen Method EU actually skip the last time, and I believe it's a good strategy to somehow try to skip this mob because it is just so inefficient to just kill this single mob with a lot of HP, not having anything to AoE, just a very big time loss.
It just takes so long. I mean, we've seen some of their teams at least attempt to kind of bring it in with the rest of these conscripts that the tank kites around in circles. It's just, you know, anything to save some time on that high health mob. Huge waste of time otherwise. We do see Nerf well moving around the room here to grab aggro and everything in order to clear the room so that the DPS members of the party are able to pick up the snake eyes on the sides of the room, and I'm not talking about dice here. They will rattle them into the eye sockets of the skull here, making sure to socket them at the same time so that they can spawn the 80% reaping wave. As we can see, they just shot up to 82. Everybody runs through the mouth as quickly as possible, and then once again, we're going to see a round of Shadow Meld. Good old Night Elves.
Yeah, so one thing to be careful about when you're doing this Shadow Meld strat is, of course, the Volcanic, right? If you Shadow Meld earlier than the rest of your team and you get a Volcanic underneath you, the Volcanic will actually get you out. So your team needs to make sure that they are coordinated and do use the Shadow Meld at the same time to not have any problems with the skip. But they did manage, and now we can see the Spell Reflect strat coming out of Nerf here, reflecting both of the Hexer's abilities at the same time, throwing them back at them.
Yeah, you can see how accurately he tried to position between the two mobs. And I did like there how he was riding JB into combat there as a mount on top of that stag. So it does do well to reflect both of the Hexers. They kill them off quickly, opting for a slightly safer strategy instead of pulling all four, as they do cast Flame Shock and Lava Burst on random members of the party. So they kill the first two, get in on the second two Hexers, make sure they coordinate some proper interrupts, unless one of them is cast, fortunately, on Nerf, who can Spell Reflected by now. Likely the 25 seconds have passed. Once these Hexers are down, it's just about grinding through that last boss and then using the last phase of the boss with the super buff, essentially, that they get, and kind of pulling that hallway of trash onto them and cleaving it down. So Abrakeydabra certainly have their work cut out for them, plus they have 2 extra deaths on the board. Only now have they finished the gauntlet.
Yeah, so the last boss fight here does have 3 phases. It used to have 4, actually, but the fight was so long that they cut it down to only 3 phases. Now, what you have to do here in their normal phase is you have those 4 Hexers that spawn that are channeling to the middle. Now, you have to kill all 4 of those Hexers to be able to heal the boss up. Now, the boss starts at 0%, you need to heal up to 70, and then the second phase will start. Once the boss is healed to 100%, the third phase will start.
So they are chewing through the Hexers right now. Still 2 left as they kind of bring this Heart Guardian around the room along with the Plague Doctor. Plague Doctor, not too dangerous. Have enough interrupts, of course, for the Snake Charm CC that he casts and also the Chain Lightning, but the Heart Guardian does a lot of damage to the tank and adds an increasing damage taken stack, 20% per stack. So you can't keep it alive for efficiency of cleave as you move around to the Hexers, but at some point you're going to have to help the tank out before the damage gets a bit too high. Nonetheless, the orb is triggered perfectly as JB pops his Tree of Life to get as much healing as he can. You see Lady as well casting Vivify in the corner there, just trying to get any extra support healing.
Yeah, so you see him healing up until 70%. Now, Tree of Life plus Innervate is a very good combo because all of your regrowth are actually instant cast now, so you can get out so many regrowths during this duration of Innervate while all of your abilities cost no mana. So it went pretty fast there. We see the next Hexer spawn now. They do have their Bloodlust ready in comparison to Abrakeydabra, who do not have their Bloodlust. It's a very good point to pop it in phase 2 because phase 2 is kind of difficult to handle with all those toads coming around and the Hexers, of course, that you have to deal with on top of the Heart Guardian. So a very good time to pop their Bloodlust. And one more time to mention that they just don't have a Battle Rest, right? So if anything goes wrong here, they are in trouble.
Well, let's not think like that. I'm sure they'll be just fine as they soak up those frogs, making sure to dispel that disease. Lady will try to help with that, of course, as much as possible on that 8-second CD. Abrakeydabra has now aggroed the last boss. Unfortunately, I also saw that one of those Orb Guardians from the Gauntlet had unfortunately snuck over to them. Not too big of a deal. They're not too threatening, but they did have to grab it and were kept in combat the entire time as they are now starting their boss encounter as well. Sorry, they're finishing their first phase of the final boss encounter. Avatar now getting healed soon to 100% for Method NA, after which after a bit of RP, the Avatar will port down and buff all of the players with that super buff, so to speak, 50% haste, 50% increased healing, and 90% reduced damage taken.
Yeah, so of course with 90% reduced damage taken, it's very difficult for them to die at this point, so it really doesn't matter anymore that they don't have a Battle Rest. We see JB walking backwards, backtracking pretty much, pulling all this trash forward, and then Nerf will pick it up. Now, of course, for JB to pull this is not a big deal because, again, 90% reduced damage. So it is very efficient to just pull back the trash while having this buff. Not only are you pretty much invincible, but you just do so much more damage. Now, one important thing to note is that as soon as this boss encounter is over, the buff will be immediately removed. So they need to make sure to not kill this last Hoodoo Hexer to not get rid of this buff too early.
Who do you kill then? Avatar is just about to be completed here. Last Hexer actually is at 3%. They have indeed dragged away from it. Oh, actually, sorry, the frame was incorrect. There was one more Hexer on the top there at 100%. They've moved the remaining 2 Heart Guardians that they've pulled from the Hall on top of it, cleaving it down effectively on top of the Hexer. Everything nicely dying together here, and Method NA has now tied up the series at 1 apiece.
Is now tied here 1-1. Method NA finding their stride, making those adjustments as we mentioned previously going into this in order to take the win over Abrakeydabra and putting us into that game 3 where there's going to be the rematch on a Shrine of the Storm there. Sours, we saw previously, and you mentioned there how Method NA wasn't really getting their stride going, wasn't really pulling aggressively enough when they faced off against 40K. Right here, they seem to be able to find it and then some.
Yeah, they made all the adjustments that they really needed to do for this map. I think this is the first time JP has ever played Tree of Life in the MDI, so they were able to change their pools up with that talent. And the dungeon was pretty good overall for them. There was a couple hiccups here and there for Abrakeydabra as well as for Method NA, but they just went through nice and smoothly. You know, there was the random deaths that Abrakeydabra had that didn't do them any favors on the first boss. The first death was recoverable. They had the B-res available, but then they had a second death. It wasn't so good. And then on this huge pull, they just had so many things go wrong, and Method A did not even need Bloodlust to deal with that pool, and they really struggled there. And then even though Nerf died like later to that lightning balls, they were fine. Method A had a big enough lead at that point in time that even a simple mistake like that wasn't going to cost them the game anymore.
Excellent there, Sours, and thank you. We're going to be moving on to Game 3 in Shrine of the Storm to find out who is going to be making it to the Grand Finals with Method EU. Don't go anywhere, guys. The MDI will return. Mythic Dungeon International. The series is tied 1-1 between Abrakeydabra and Method NA. This is going to be another rematch map for them. They played previously together on this Shrine of the Storm map, and that was also, Sours, as we were mentioning along the break. What was the dungeon where Method NA really just had their simple error, but they've had so many redemption keys as they've been running through this lower bracket, and they've massively improved since then. Yeah,
the last time Method NA and Abrakeydabra went against each other in this dungeon was when Method NA failed to do the Shadow Meld skip properly, and that was when they were actually sent to the lower bracket from Abrakeydabra. Since then, Abrakeydabra has not had to do this dungeon again, but Method NA has. When Method NA did this dungeon in the lower bracket versus Learn to Fly, they did the dungeon faster than Abrakeydabra did when Abrakeydabra beat them, as well. They did it also with 0 deaths, where there was 1 death in Abrakeedabra's win, but it was a full minute and a half slower than Method NA's win over Learn to Fly.
Oh, we've seen previously not only on Shrine of the Storm here, but also on the Ataldazar keys, where Method NA has really stepped it up and corrected those little mistakes, those simple errors. They played more passively, more safe when they needed to. They adjusted their strategies when they had to for Temple of Sethralis. Not seeing any compositional changes coming up for us. So going into this Shrine of the Storm, this was the dungeon that did end up sending Method NA into the lower bracket. It could be the dungeon that sends them home. Tied up in the series, Abrakeydabra versus Method NA. Winner goes to the Grand Finals.
Man, we've seen this dungeon a lot, and it's really made and well, I was going to say made and break, but you can. Some teams have been broken by this dungeon. We saw Method NA, of course, get put in the lower bracket because of it. So this is either redemption time or just another dungeon that's going to shatter them. But you know, to Sour's point, Method NA's performance for redemption keys, as he calls them, has been quite phenomenal. I mean, they've really stepped up their game to the team that people know that they are, that they should be, and the caliber of the players that are on the team. So really excited to see how they perform here. And Abrakeydabra, of course, just that kind of EU all-star team composed of a lot of different high-end teams from the previous MDI. So this one is going to be an absolute slugfest here.
So we see Abrakeydabra here, of course, only playing this dungeon 1 time. Now they did have time to practice this dungeon though off stream, so maybe they have some new strategies coming in here as well, because of course they figured out that they're going to play against Method NA, and they probably figured out as well that Method NA finished the dungeon faster than them. So maybe there was some small things they saw other teams do that they adjusted their strategy to. And one difference already that we can see is Method NA used their Bloodlust for this very first pull, while Abrakeydabra didn't.
They didn't, and you know what? They're about to kill everything at around the same time, so not sure how much time they really gained from that. A lot more damage coming out of the the two rogues a lot more, relatively higher damage coming out of Abrakeedabra's rogues for that pretty similar pull over the ones over with Method NA. Now, Nagur, we are back in the raging category, so mobs, trash mobs, of course, will do 100% increased damage, sub 30% health. We're back in Grievous as well, so the same thing we saw in Tempest Thralis. You start dipping below 90% HP, you will get an increasing physical dot up to 4 stacks.
Yeah, so they do a bit of a different pull here. Now, one thing to note as well, that Abrakeydabra was actually faster in his very first pull without Bloodlust than Method NA was with their Bloodlust. So maybe Abrakeydabra is using more different cooldowns, is using personal damage cooldowns, compared to Method NA maybe just only using Bloodlust and no cooldowns. We will see later on what Abrakeydabra uses that Bloodlust for. But one thing that we also have to see here, that they're cutting backwards. Now, we've kept mentioning this kind of thing over and over, that kiting backwards just costs time, right? Even if you need to kite somewhere, you need to make sure that you're efficient with your movement. We have seen a lot of small things from Method AU.
Yeah, I mean, this kiting backwards here could be one of two reasons. One, of course, the raging, especially with all the attendant casters that cast the water bolt on the tank. Perhaps they decided to just kind of make sure that they didn't have any danger, but it looks more so like, to me, they were trying to separate the distance of where the reaping mobs spawned so that they immediately ran to this first boss area and cast their shadow meld as night elves. So looks like that worked out mostly to their favor. Only one tormented soul was accidentally pulled, as we now see a fairly sizable trash pull being done as the first boss RPs and spawns for the Method NA has spawned Acusir and already aggroed it.
Yeah, this is a pretty big pull coming out of Abrakeydabra here, pulling all this trash on top of the boss. This is what they're saved their Bloodlust for, so they're using it right now, clearing all this trash, these Templars and the casters on top of the Reaping Souls that they didn't manage to reset with their Shadow Melt. Now, those Reaping Souls, the reason probably why so many of those Reapings get skipped is because there's just so many caster mobs in this dungeon. So whenever you do get a Reaping, most of them are going to be casters. And the casters are so difficult to deal with because you can't position them properly where you want them to be, and they just consistently keep casting that bolt on random targets. It does quite a bit of damage if there's a lot of them going through.
This was a very juicy pull coming out of Abrakeydabra, but they're working their magic here and have managed to down it. Really well played by them. Method NA trickling some trash from the edges as well on top of Acusir here as much as they can, but certainly not nearly as brazen of a pull as Abrakeydabra had there. Abrakeydabra now down to 69% on their Acusir pull. Method NA to 54%. We'll be seeing the split soon, of course, with the 3 Aqualings that spawn in an equilateral triangle along the edges of the circular platform here. Always spawning in the same area, so you'll have 1 by the stairs, 2 by the edges of the platform. But, Nagura, these Aqualings do mimic all of the boss's main abilities, including that dangerous Surging Rush. Yeah,
the Surging Rush is the one ability you have to look for out for the most. They will pretty much target a random location and charge towards this location. If you get caught in their path, then you will get a lot of damage and you will be knocked back. So if you get knocked back, there's also the danger of falling off the platform, which is very dangerous, and of course you have to watch out for that. Then we also have other abilities like this knockback, as we can see right now, which just pushes you away from the mob and does a lot of damage while it happens. And of course all of them need to be tanked too. If they're not being tanked, then they keep casting a Soul Blast or something like that on the highest aggro target, which does a lot of damage, but can be spell reflected.
You know, it was very impressive the pull that Abrakeydabra did with all that trash on top of the first phase of Acusir here, but really, I mean, Method has done an almost equivalent pull, but just done it at a slower pace, splitting up that equivalent pull and dragging in 2 to 3 mobs at the same time. So I doubt that they're going to end up with too different of a trash percentage by the time it's all said and done here on the first boss. Nonetheless, Method NA started the boss first and will also finish this boss first as Acusir does go down. The Galecaller Apprentices were perhaps pulled just a bit too late. They do have to sit around and DPS them as Acusir has already died. Abrakeydabra will make up a bit of time here as Acusir has reformed from his phase 2 Aqualings and has now been killed for Abrakeydabra as well.
Yeah, so the only difference in trash is 2%, right? Abrakeydabra does still have 2% more trash. They were a little bit slower in the boss, but the 2% is probably going to make up for it. Now, one difference as well, though, is the Bloodlust, right? So Abrakeydabra will only have it up in 7 minutes, while Method NA used it at the very start and will have it up much sooner.
Interesting to see. I mean, a similar pull coming out of both teams here, but we have seen two versions of this pull, and each team is doing a different version. So on one hand, you have the double sap on the Iron Hull apprentices on the outside. The tank runs downstairs, grabs everything, brings it all the way back upstairs. Divine Field has opted to actually run downstairs, grab the two Iron Hull apprentices and the surrounding trash in the Scorn mini-boss, mini-boss room, and just cleave it all in the middle. So in terms of movement, slight efficiency in favor of Abrakeydabra here, but certainly more dangerous as you're in a much more enclosed space now.
Definitely, but we saw the Ring of Peace coming out of Swagfest here, making sure Divine Field is safe as he dropped really low. But as we can see, they're already down with this trash. They got to 40%, meaning they procced their reaping. They will walk all the way through this mini-boss, and then they will Shadow Melt. Now, Method NA did this. Okay, they did reset. Okay, for a second I thought the mini-boss didn't reset. But Method NA did just skip, the Shadow Melt skip, already in one of their last runs, and they didn't manage to do it. So let's see if Method NA does pretty much do the skip correctly, because the last time it went wrong, it cost them a lot of time.
I'm really loving the fluidity of movement here from Abrakeydabra. I mean, they just don't even breathe for a second. Shadow Meld came out, mobs reset. One of the reaping mobs still followed them with the Grave Bolt, no problem. They picked up the patrol. They went right into one of the packs on the right. They grabbed a bunch of finishes. They're just going hard at it right now. Grievous starting to stack up a bit on the side of Abrakeydabra, so Elserat will have to pay a bit of attention to Swagfist. That actually dips quite low now. About to get his fourth stack of Grievous. Starts pumping some healing into him, making sure it doesn't get too out of hand. Jay eating a lot of damage as well, gets down to 5%, managed to get healed up. A lot of got residual damage coming out as Divine Field subs 10% right now, getting all of the healing he can right now, but he's getting so many Grievous stacks built up, and Ashine as well, dipping so low. Still no proc for the cheat death for the Rogues right now. He's trying to stabilize desperately as they kite around in circles with the platform, but there's so many casters as well that need to be interrupted. It looks like finally we can stop holding our breath. Abrakeydabra has come out on top of this pull, and Method NA rearing up to do a similarly large, dangerous pull.
That was so close for Abrakeydabra here. They very well recovered, though, at this stage. We saw Divine Field just leaping away, trying to get away from these casters, trying to land off sight, making sure that none of these casts go through, as Elserat was struggling to heal up the group, right? If any of the damage dealers get any sort of damage, if they get hit by an ability that they shouldn't, then they do get this Grievous applied to them. Now, on a pull like that, where there's so much tank healing that is required, if the healer spends any sort of time trying to heal other members because of Grievous or they get hit by abilities, it takes away healing from Divine Field, meaning that all of them just dropped very low and Elserat just fell behind overall.
Method NA does not care about the pull Abrakeydabra has. They just took all the trash and brought it right on top of the second boss. Brother Ironhull and Galecaller Faye have been aggroed, but a lot of damage coming in on Nerf Clap, and there's a very limited amount of space on this platform where he can safely kite because of these raging mobs that have procced as well. So a lot to pay attention for the team here, not to mention that the runes that go down for Galecaller Faye, that gives them the haste buff, also buffs enemies as well. A lot of damage coming in on Yoda. The entire team getting chunked here. JB's got his work cut out for him as Yoda dips low, Shakib dips low as well. All of the DPS struggling to stay alive. They're accruing more and more Grievous stacks right now. The second boss has been pulled for Abrakeydabra in a very calm fashion at this point. No trash on top of it, but it looks like Method NA has also pulled off a quite sketchy pull and managed to stabilize.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra actually also pulled this trash on top of it. They were just like a little bit slower, and both of them do not have their Bloodlust, but we've seen how dangerous this kind of pull is and how dangerous this boss is in general, especially Galecaller Faye, just having this constant blast that is getting casted by her. If it's not interrupted, the whole group will get an initial damage on application, and will also get a debuff on them, which increases their nature damage taken. So it's very important to do interrupt this debuff, but if you do, you see those tornadoes that are spawning. Now those tornadoes do a lot of damage if you get hit by them. And we see those wind zone on the ground. If the tornadoes go through the zone, they will actually speed up and go faster. Now it's very important to not get hit by them, because on top of just Grievous and all the other damage that happens on this pad, it can kill you very easily.
Certainly don't want to get blown away by those. Now, we see that Abrakeydabra is actually doing the more effective DPS strat, keeping both bosses alive and DPSing them down evenly, but of course more dangerous, as they will have to constantly deal with the mechanics you just mentioned, Nagura, including, I mean, look at their platform, it's just full of tornadoes right now. Method Method NA just getting Iron Hold down to 7%. Not a single death on either team. Bloodlust is back up for Method NA. 2 more minutes for Abrakeydabra. The bosses die at around the same time. About 5 seconds difference between the two teams. This is going to be a close one.
This is so close. So both of the teams pretty much have the same trash percentage too. 57% on Abrakeedabra's side, Method NA on 56%. So it's 1-1. This is the last game. This is the decider. So anything that goes wrong here will pretty much decide the whole match and who is out of the tournament and who moves on. Now we see Abrakeydabra doing a really big pull here. There's so many enforcers they pulled on top. This means Divine Fields cannot be hit by these mobs, especially not when they're raging. So you can see the Ring of Peace coming down here.
You can see that Divine Shield's shield wall fades away from him as those metallic shields. That graphic kind of goes away. There's 5 enforcers in this group. Now, if you're about 15-20 yards away from them as the tank, they will not do their deep smash, but if he gets too close here, he is dead. All of his CDs are consumed at the moment just to even get that pull together. Mass amounts of damage. Really ballsy pull here from Abrakeydabra. Looks like they will pull it off, though. They've already dealt with the third Reaping Wave. Same with Method NA at 61% on the trash, but they have some Risen Souls actually coming in right now. And of course, I mean, just here comes the troop, right, for both sides. Both of the Reapings, they're just so far away, right, because a lot of the mobs were killed before the second boss. It's going to take them a bit of time to get in as both teams desperately try to run up the bridge. I'm curious to see if any Shadow Melds come out to avoid the pack here.
Most definitely. So they triggered the Reaping Wave for both sides, right? They skip the trash that they want to skip, and then they Shadow Meld. So they skip the Reaping on top of just skipping the trash here. Very efficient use of Shadow Meld. Now, some of the mobs we see, a couple of Risen Souls are here, which is not going to take them a long time to kill, and then they can move on. Now, we see on Method NA side, they already pulled up the Shadow Meld. They did pull this Tentacle Pack the last time as well, without pulling the Patrol on top. We've seen other teams, and I believe it was Abrakeydabra too, that at some point pulled mobs together, while Method NA played it a little bit safer, and they're not increasing their risk here.
No, they're not, but Abrakeydabra has a bit of room to play with in terms of trash percentage here, as they did pull all 5 enforcers, so they had about a 6% advantage over Method NA, so that's why they kind of stopped to kill just the 2 Risen Souls, so everybody could mount up and stealth past the Tentacle Pack that Method NA just stopped to kill right here. I believe they're pulling both caster packs together, is that's what I'm seeing here.
They also popped their Bloodlust.
Yeah, this is actually really scary pull. You have 4 Depth Bringers in here that cast that Rip the Rip Soul rather that I always talk about. Does a tremendous amount of damage to the tank and decreases max HP by 10%. So no doubt here that they pulled off with their Bloodlust, wanting to make sure that they kill these mobs as quickly as possible. Abrakeydabra taking it a bit slower, killed one of the 4 packs and has moved over to the other. Method NA still making sure to CC as well as moving away from those mental assaults, else you will get stunned.
Yeah, the mental assaults do have a bit of a interesting animation. It's a bit hard to see where the edges of this are, so you need to make sure that you walk as far away as possible, because if you get hit, you are getting stunned, which is obviously deadly, especially if it is on the tank or the healer, but we see none of them get hit by this ability. Now, Method NA using their Bloodlust very efficiently, getting that 78%. Now, after this, they are probably going to proc their Reaping here on Method NA's side, and Abrakeydabra also doing the same thing, just getting to those tentacles. Both of those teams are so close to one another.
It's actually so close right now, closer than a hair, which I wouldn't know anything about. Method NA has actually procced their Reaping and are getting ready to kind of either pull it on top of the boss or likely meld it off. We do know there's a lot of caster mobs in the background, probably something they don't want to have them hit in the back with once the Lord Stormsong is pulled here. Abrakeydabra opting to do the other side of the tentacles as well as the kind of Reaping comes in. Swagfist does go down, so we're going to have the first death here. Ashon gets really low as well. Immediately the battle res comes up from Elstrat, wanting to make sure that they're full strength for this combination of Reaping along with the tentacles on the side. Method NA has already started on Lord Stormsong. That can be an extremely costly death. Later on, Swagfist goes down again. Elstrat goes down as well. Absolute disaster here for Abrakeydabra. It's going to be a full team wipe. There's nobody that can battle res, as the only battle res on the team has died. Divine Field about to go down as well. Dr. J, I don't know if he actually got the stealth off. No, he didn't. So full team wipe here. This is an absolute disaster with all those Reaping mobs with a huge aggro radius. So right now, this is Method NA's game to lose as they reach the halfway mark on Lord Stormsong.
This is so bad for Abrakeydabra. There's no way of them coming back from from this wipe unless Method NA makes a huge mistake as well. Now, I'm not completely sure what they did there, because after they triggered the Reaping Wave from this one tentacle pack, what we usually see from those teams is they go to the boss and they Shadow Melt to get rid of the Reaping Wave. But we saw Divine Field just charge into the other tentacle pack. Now, these tentacles are very scary because they randomly target people with a leash cast that does a lot of damage. Now, usually when you only pull one tentacle pack, then all of them have their defensives ready, they have their stuns ready, and so on. But if you pull a second pack right after the first one, people all of a sudden don't have their defensives ready anymore. No cloaks, no anything like that. And we saw just people getting hit by these abilities and die. I'm not completely sure if they maybe missed a mob beforehand and had to kill the tentacle pack to get enough percentage to get to the next room, and they just kind of had a split decision to pull this pack.
But why would they not do it after shadow melding all of the enemies off? That was not a good play from them. And this dungeon is incredibly punishing in terms of where you start. There's no checkpoint here. So, well, except for the third boss, but by then you're probably done with the dungeon. It's not too difficult in the last room. So they've started all the way back at the beginning of the dungeon. They have to clean up some random reaping mobs along the way that have a ridiculously large aggro radius. And they now have to deal with this mini boss here because they've not unlocked the shortcut to move over towards the second boss's platform. So, I mean, barring a full wipe from Method NA right now, maybe even two since they have unlocked the second checkpoint at Lord Stormsong, I mean, Method NA is likely going to take this. They go for a little dip underwater, avoiding those electric jellyfish, making sure they don't get that 8-second unimmutable stun. JB paddles through the water as fast as his little kitty paws can take him and moves over to the safety of the fourth boss's platform.
Yeah, so we've seen this last boss play out pretty much the same time from the same way of all the teams. So they do engage the boss. That is, the boss is one important ability, which is a debuff that gets applied to the healer. Now, this debuff stacks up to 9 stacks. It will increase the healer's damage done, and it will reduce his max HP, right? So they want to have the healer with this buff, and afterwards, when he's in the mission phase, he kind of just stands there and does nothing until you interrupt the boss. So during this time, they will pull the trash to get the rest of the percentage that they need, while the healer does more damage.
So unfortunately, they did not have the shortcut opened up for them, as we can see with Abrakeydabra. I'm pretty sure you have to kill the Ritualist close to the edge there, not the second boss. So they actually have to jump through the entirety of that trash. As you can see, Divine Field just struggling to get through. Ashine dies on the way. Divine Field's probably going to go down as well. Not sure if they'll get any form of savior off for the res. Elstrat probably desperately looking for somewhere to shadow meld, but there's just no room on this platform because of all the reaping that they skipped. Probably every square inch of the entirety of the second half of the dungeon is covered by some form of reaping mob. Method NA, of course, now dealing with their first phase and likely only phase transition here on Volzith as they work to cleave down the remaining forgotten denizens. Then they will move over to the actual 3-pack of trash that you mentioned, Nagura.
Yeah, so those different phases are actually kind of difficult to deal with if you don't have a lot of interrupts. Now, of course, with triple melee, you're not going to be struggling here, but those denizens, they are actually casting an ability the whole time, which if it goes through, it will heal them to full HP, and it will do an AoE damage on all of them. Now, of course, it's not only is it very inefficient for them to heal to full HP, and they will have to deal the damage again, but it also does AoE damage, and it will kill the healer JB because he does have this debuff on him, which reduces their max HP.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first full screen of the tournament that we're seeing right now. So we got our first full screen BM. Unfortunately, Abrakeydabra just does not have the time to be able to catch up. The last eel packs are pulled over here for Method NA as they work to cleave them down with the power of JB's buff coming up from the boss. All that extra increased damage. Just got to make sure not to get any of those dots accidentally applied to him as Nerf Clap kind of kites away. There's a lot of shadow damage that comes up. Raging hits on the eels, no problem for them. 92%. Now they grab the remaining 2 eel packs, which will put them close to 100%. They will likely CC one of the eels to make sure they don't actually proc their fifth wave of reaping, making sure, of course, to kill it just around the time that Volzith dies.
Now, they do not have their Bloodlust ready. We've seen teams before use their Bloodlust just once they interrupt the boss, pop the Bloodlust just to make sure they're going to kill the boss before the second intermission phase. Because, of course, this whole intermission phase takes a long time. You need to kill the tank mob, you need to kill those 2 denizens, so it's very important that you do have enough damage. But I believe they have a reason to not have their bloodlust ready here, and they probably calculated that they are going to have enough damage. Of course, with JB having this buff, and of course JB really likes doing that feral affinity rotation, so I do believe they're going to have enough damage to skip this intermission phase even without the bloodlust here.
Should be no problem for them. We can already see the very last eel that they will need to kill. It's both paralyzed and sapped on the side of the room there. It's not going absolutely anywhere. Only thing they have to pay attention here to is making sure that those 5 manifestations do not reach Volzith, else they will give him 10 energy per and can actually very easily trigger that last phase transition. No problem here for Method NA as they look to down Volzith here. 20% left on the boss. The manifestations slowly making their way in. No problem for that Ring of Peace though.
So clean by them, 0 deaths up until this point. So the whole run, as we said earlier, just the very first time we saw them in Shrine, they had this huge wipe, just kind of like Abrakeydabra here, right? But they're just pulling it perfectly. They just have to kill this last eel, and they're gonna be in the final.
Final eel going down here, and we are just moments away from an all-Method grand final in just a moment. Flawless performance here from Method NA as they down the last eel and take the series 2-1, returning to the upper bracket.
Method NA finding their redemption on Shrine of the Storm here, winning the comeback against Abrakeydabra, who sent them to the lower bracket, made them fight their way out of it here. Sours, that was an incredible performance, not only by Method NA there, but just the consistency in how they were executing. This the third time they've had to run Shrine of the Storm here. Just an incredible performance.
Yeah, a lot of the pulls this time were a lot bigger than we've seen in previous Shrines of the Storm. This pull into the first boss by Abrakeydabra was pretty insane. It's, what is this, Reaping, Trash, boss, all together in a boss one. It was crazy, and they did the boss without a hitch. Everything was looking good at this point. Like, the bosses were neck and neck. They were pulling further ahead, and then both teams kind of met up here on boss 2, and then Method NA just blazes on ahead, pulls a ton of trash into the boss. They didn't have any issue at all. And then they ended up killing the boss just a little bit faster than Abrakeydabra did, just a few seconds ahead at this point in time. And then it was looking good until a very specific part of the dungeon where it wasn't looking good.
Let's talk about that elephant in the room here, Sours. That wipe, that large wipe that they had, as they went from, as they procced Reaping here, going into that next set of Abyss Dwellers.
We're not quite sure exactly what happened to these guys here, but they procced the Reaping wave. I guess they didn't Shadow Melt it off. They didn't drop combat, and then they just run into the trash. The Reaping comes in. This is way too much damage to handle. All these Tormented Souls casting Grave Bolts on everybody, while these Abyss Dwellers are casting this Lash on everyone. It's too much damage for Elsarat to handle. This wipe cost them the game, and it created the very first full screen that we've seen here for MDI 2019.
It almost looked like, I mean, it was hard to tell exactly what happened. It almost looked like perhaps they actually proxy aggroed the tentacles there from Swag. I'm not really sure. We'll have to see exactly what happened. But, I mean, they know better than to just run over into them, you know, but we'll see.
Especially with the close proximity of all the other caster packs that they had to be dealing with previously here. But that does mean the #1 and #2 seeds, Method EU versus Method NA, will meet each other in the grand finals to compete for that large sum of points that'll make it to land, as well as prize money that'll be joining them as well here. So very big game that's going to be coming up against them, and they will be starting off in Waycrest Manor, a dungeon that Method EU ended up going faster than they thought they would on their original strategy here, Nagura.